Hey everybody, I'm Elysia Buss with Horsepower Empowerment Through Connection, and I have the great honor and privilege of getting to hang out and spend time with Warwick Schiller, an amazing Australian, and you know how I love my Australians. Warwick was originally from Australia. He came to the United States in his 20s and started working on pursuing his dream, training horses, where at some point he just reached for the stars and managed to become the world reserve champion for the Reining Association. And get this, he got to work and perform in the 2010 and 2018 World Equestrian Games. And I'm super excited to hear about that. But where it goes from deep and just deeper as he explores the connection to the mind and body of the horse and all sorts of training methods. Warwick, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
It is indeed. We had such a great conversation even before it started. Warwick and I were talking about how we should have hit the record button sooner. So you might just have to hear about a little bit more of that later. But Warwick, so gosh, where to even begin? You have your podcast, you have your like 600 video library on your website that people can purchase for courses, which is just like mind blowing that you have so much content. I'm just like, I might have to spend like the next 4 months just deep diving into all the amazing content you have on there.
All that stuff came, I used to train horses. I don't train horses for other people anymore, but all that stuff came, I was training horses, and I would have either horses to start that came in or problem horses. And I was kind of an end of the line kind of a guy. Like, we've tried everything and it won't work, my rearing, bucking, bolting, whatever. And so those horses would come in and I would video them, like video the first day, video the second day, video the third day. And just because I, as a young trainer who was excited about learning stuff, I was, I'd buy DVDs back in the day, DVDs.
Yeah, no, totally.
And watch them like, yeah, but how did you get to that point? Like it was never like the beginning sort of thing. And so when I started making videos, I was like, this horse just arrived. Sometimes with video, I'm getting off the trailer, and you'd see the interaction between the owner and them or whatever. So, that's how I ended up with that much content. I wasn't, these days, I set out to make content. Like, I'm going to go outside and we're going to whatever. Whereas back then I was just doing my job and I had someone just videoing it while I was doing it.
Sure.
It wasn't hard to, it's not hard to rack up a lot of stuff if you're not going out of your way to do it. But
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And now you do clinics all over the place and you're a motivational speaker. Like, what was the moment when you felt like you just went from being like regular cowboy, enjoying spending time with horses, and all of a sudden you're like, I really have something here and I'm going to do clinics and I want to be a motivational speaker. Like, what was that?
I didn't make that decision. That decision was made for me. In 2000, so my wife and son and I moved back to Australia in 2006, end of 2006, and we were there for 4 years before we moved back here. But in 2008, I went to I was presenting at a big horse expo in Australia, and I wasn't presenting as in I'm a presenter at a horse expo. I was on the board. I was really involved in the reining. I was really passionate about the reining at the time. And my wife and I were on the board of the association in Australia called Reining Australia. And at one of the meetings, they said, "Oh, we've had a letter from Equitana. This is a big horse expo. Can someone do a bit of a reining demonstration down there?" And it's in a place called Melbourne, which is the very bottom of Australia. And
yeah.
We lived about 8 hours from there. And some of the other people on the board are in Queensland, and that's like 36 hours drive from there. And I said, well, I'm probably the closest. I could probably do that, So when Equitana heard I was coming to do that, they have a colt starting competition during that big thing, which is called Way of the Horse. It's just like Road to the Horse here in America, if you're familiar with that. That just happened last weekend. They asked me would I be the in-arena commentator, like talking about what's going on, not necessarily the presenter about all the, the technical, or not all the introduction to stuff, but color commentator, like in the football or whatever.
Sure.
I said, sure, I can do that. So I actually got to stand in the arena in front of 3,000 or 4,000 people 3 days in a row and explain what these other guys were doing with these horses in the thing. And if I have one talent, it would be explaining things to people in a way they can understand. That's probably my one talent. Meaning, what is a talent? It's something you don't have to work on. You know, I have to work on a lot of stuff that I don't have to work on that. I don't lie awake at night thinking about how am I going to say something. Stuff just comes out. So anyway, after that, I started getting phone calls from people and say, "Hey, would you like to come and do a clinic for our horse association, our little adult riders club or whatever it is?" And I'm like, well, I've never really thought of doing clinics before. Like, oh, please. Okay. So I've never had a whole lot of uh, self-confidence. And so I'm not the guy that's going to go, yeah, I'm going to do clinics and I'm going to rock this and I'm going to show these people what I know and talking about. They kind of had to talk me into it. And so I did quite a few clinics while I was in Australia. And then when we moved back to the US in the end of 2010, I had to start all over again. Like, I've got no clients, I've got to start all over again. So I've got a bit of free time. But doing those clinics, I started to realize some very common mistakes that people make with horses, or just common things that people do wrong or don't understand, that makes being around their horses really dangerous or hard work or whatever. So I wanted to share that. So I just started making some little YouTube videos, showing people how to do like simple stuff. This was not training. This is like how to hose your horse off without dying, just
without dying. Like, if anybody's hosed a horse off, like, it can be very exciting, let me tell you.
And it's not, it's not this amazing groundbreaking stuff. It was just simple stuff. But then, and at the time, YouTube, when you first have a YouTube channel, you can't put longer than a 10-minute video on there. They don't want, putting 3 hours of your cat chasing a laser pointer up and down the hall or something. And after a while, people said, "Hey, can you do longer videos?" I said, "Well, I can't on here." So, but we want longer videos. So, and when I was doing those clinics in Australia, people would say, "Well, we want you to make videos." I'm like, "You don't need my videos." And I would tell them, "This horse, you want to do the horsemanship stuff? I would buy this guy's DVDs. You want to do the reining stuff? I'd buy this guy DVDs. You don't need to get it from me. There's way better people producing content than me." So that's how all that went down. And then I just, like I said, I started putting these things on YouTube. That got bigger, not bigger, but people wanted longer videos, which I couldn't do on YouTube at the time. I could now because I've got bigger numbers. And so it caused me to start up an online video subscription library thing. That was just a little thing on the side at the time. And that has grown into my, my main business. That's my main source of income. But neither of those two were things that I said, I'm going to put some videos on YouTube and get people interested. And then when they want more, I'm going to charge them for it. And then that's going to be, there was no business plan. It's just, this stuff fell in my lap.
So yeah, no. Did you ever, so it sounds like, did you ever have like imposter syndrome? Like, because you kept referring people out to other people that you felt like better.
Did you say did I or do
I? Either. I
yes on both.
Yeah, I mean,
yes on both. Yes on both.
The vulnerable question. Yeah. So in present time, and then like there's this imposter syndrome. And so having that, how do you work through that?
You know what? I'd say these days it's probably a little better these days because I've got to meet people who I think are a big deal. And when you sit down and have a chat with them, they've got it too. So once you realize that, once you realize your heroes or the people that you really admire at the top of their game or whatever, sit down and they're authentic and they're vulnerable and they tell you that, then you go, oh, well, it's nothing to worry about. Everybody's got it. So, but in the past, I tell you what, in the past, I think imposter syndrome is covered up quite well with false bravado.
Yeah.
And it kind of, passive aggressive is not the right term for it, but it kind of ends up with you being a bit, maybe a bit over the top sort of thing. You're just trying to, you're trying to talk yourself into thinking you're worthy. But I think a lot of this stuff just comes down to your own self-judgment. Once you clean out your demons, and it goes away after a while, but there's a lot of inner work that we can get into that I've done that really takes care of that. But there is no, if you've got imposter syndrome and you haven't done the work, I don't know what to do with it, because everybody has it, and those thoughts still come up, but I'm much more at ease with them, and I'm much more probably at ease with me, really.
No, that's great. I really appreciate you sharing that work. And so that pops into my head a question in regards to when you work with the horses, because the work that you do with the horses is so profound. And I feel like it requires a person to be in alignment. You need to be congruent in order to get the kind of results that you do with the horses. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that when you step into that space with those horses, you are fully present, and that imposter syndrome is not able to be present with you in order to do the work you do.
Yes, very much so. I mean, I do clinics, and I'll step in the arena at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I won't leave it till 5 or 6 o'clock at night, except to go pee, sort of thing. You know, sometimes I won't eat, drink, whatever. I'll go all day, and people are like, you must have an iron constitution. Like, you're tough. Like, I couldn't do that. I'm not tough at all. I cannot do anything for any length of time that I'm not passionate about. And when I am like doing a clinic and work, especially when I'm working with a horse or helping someone with a horse, I'm narrating moment by moment what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, all that sort of stuff. Well, you can't be 10 seconds behind or 10 seconds ahead. So that's one of the few times I'm really present. So I get in like the flow state doing clinics, and I'm just out there, and I don't, you know, I might fly from here to Australia, and then the next day, you know, well, you get to, when you fly from America to Australia, you get there at like 7 o'clock in the morning, but then I might have to drive somewhere, take some extra flights, whatever, to get from going. The next day I get up and I go, and I don't have jet lag. You know, I'm not hot, I'm not cold, I don't have jet lag, I'm not tired when I'm doing those clinics, because I'm just in the flow state. I'm in the present. It's one of the few, because I'm very in my head, have been all my life. So it's it's almost a peaceful place.
I completely understand.
You know, it's one of the few places I'm completely at peace, and that shuts this up, because if I did clinics to where they were just a demonstration of what I can do without narrating it, I could probably get
a little bit of the imposter syndrome kicking in.
No, not so much the imposter syndrome, but I could get not present. I could be 10 seconds behind. I could be 10 seconds ahead. I could be 10 minutes ahead. I could be thinking about, I wonder what that lady's thinking about me, or whatever. But when you're narrating it, you've got this stream coming out.
Stream of consciousness, yeah.
Yeah, you are in every moment. And it's like doing things like this. I do quite a few podcasts, and some of the guests I've had have been amazing. I got to listen to them later on, because I'm not talking and thinking about the profound thing that was in the last sentence. I'm just in each thing as it comes out. And I'll go back and listen to them later, and I'll listen to them several times, because there was so much cool stuff that I didn't get to masticate, you know?
Yep, I do the exact same thing.
Yeah, but asking about that, you know, when you're working with a horse, you have to be congruent. I've kind of got part one and part two to my horse training. I have in the last few years, I've realized I've spent most of my life in a shutdown state.
Yeah.
Very highly functional shutdown, where I had no emotions. So working with a horse, my inner landscape and my outer landscape weren't incongruent, because I had no inner landscape. You know what I mean? So if you are training horses for the public, it's actually quite a good skill to have, because they learn to not be influenced by that energy. So you can kind of hand the reins over to them, and they'll work for whoever presses the right button, because they don't listen to the other stuff. They just listen to the physical things. And so it makes very, very functional horses for other people. But I was at so I presented at a lot of horse expos, and I was at a horse expo in Madison, Wisconsin a few years ago. And at those horse expos, sometimes you're doing a demo in an arena with a horse, and sometimes during the day you might be in a lecture hall just talking to a group of people. And usually there's one of those a day at a lot of these horse expos. And one of the topics that I do, it's a talk I call Everything I Learned in Life I Learned from Horses. And over the years, it's, you know, every time I do it, it's a bit different than the last time, because it might be 3 months since the last one I did, and things have changed a little bit. But I did this one in Madison, Wisconsin a few years ago. And I kind of spit out some stuff. There was a room full of probably 100, 200 people. I spat out some stuff I probably hadn't ever spat out before. And afterwards, I was walking back to my booth, and I walked past Barbara Schulte's booth. I don't know if you've ever heard of Barbara Schulte. she's a mindset coach for equestrians. And I walked past Barbara's booth and she said, "How'd you talk?" I said, "Oh, I'm exhausted. Like I'm just wrung out." She goes, "Why?" And I said, "Oh, I kind of spit out some stuff that I haven't ever spat out before, maybe to anybody." And she said something about vulnerability being a superpower or whatever. And she mentioned someone, and I'd never heard of what I didn't know what she was talking about. So I go back to the booth, and I'm sitting there at the booth, and people are coming by the booth having a chat. And this lady comes up to the booth, and she's a subscriber to my online video things, and she was asking some questions. And she's a therapist, she's a psychologist, and she asked a question. I said, "Yeah, remember I talked about this in my talk this morning?" And she said, "Oh, I wasn't there. I just got here." And I'm like, "Oh." And then I told her about that. But then I told her about being exhausted. She goes, "Well, Brene Brown says that you know, shame is the scourge of society and vulnerability is the antidote to shame." I'm like, "Wow, that's profound. Do you know Barbara Schulte? Come over here. I want you to tell Barbara. Barbara, this is Megan. Megan, this is Barbara. Tell her what you just told me." And Megan says that. And Barbara goes, "Yeah, I just told you about Brene Brown before. That's who I was talking about before." So I've spent 50, I think I was 50 at the time, spent 50 years of my life never hearing about Brene Brown and get told about it, like half an hour apart. But so I came home from that thing and started listening to Brene Brown. And she's in one of her audiobooks, she says, you cannot selectively suppress emotions. When you suppress the lower ones, you automatically suppress the higher ones. And so, men growing up in my generation, you don't cry, you don't show fear, all that sort of stuff. And in my family, you don't show grief either. Like, go to a funeral, oh, well, he's dead. And he's worrying about it. What are you going to do about it?
Right.
And so when I heard that in that book, I'm like, that's interesting. I know my lower emotions are suppressed, but I've never thought if that has any effect on the higher ones. I wonder, could I actually feel more joy, happiness, elation, those sorts of things? And so this Megan, who's a therapist, I contacted her and I said, what sort of, if I was going to look into that sort of thing, where would I go? What sort of, what I say, a counselor, a therapist, what would I do? She said, I would actually go and see a therapist who specializes in DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. And I believe it was originally created for highly suicidal adults, but they found it's good for anybody with any emotional regulation issues. And so I went along to the therapist, told her what I wanted to do. And she said, "Oh, yeah, this will be easy. We also have group therapy at nighttime, but you don't need that." Anyway, after about 3 months of going to these one-on-one sessions and we're not getting anywhere, she goes, "You know what, you probably should come to the night ones too." And so I started going to these group therapy sessions once a week. And I spent a year doing that. I really didn't get anywhere because apparently you actually have to have some emotions to regulate for that particular therapy to work. Most people there had anger issues, anxiety issues, but they had emotions. I didn't have them things. So, so it didn't really work, but I learned so much stuff there. We used to have homework every week, and one of the homeworks, and this was profound, and earlier on before we started recording, we talked about some stuff that this is related to, but one of our homeworks was, okay, so what we're going to do this week for homework is you're going to count your judgmental thoughts. Okay, so whether you get like a little clicker like a bouncer at a nightclub has or whatever, or get some stones in your pocket, whatever. When you have a judgmental thought, click it or move it over and count them each day. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have probably 3 a day. So I'll probably just get 3 pebbles and stick in my pocket. And when they pop up, I'll move them over. I had 21 before breakfast the first day. And the thing that I found about counting judgmental thoughts is you become aware of how many of them you have, number one.
Yeah.
But number two is you become aware of how many of them you have about yourself.
Yeah.
And then if you listen to Brene Brown, and she's a shame researcher, and she says the difference between guilt and shame is guilt is I did something stupid. Shame is I am stupid. Guilt's a focus on behavior and shame's a focus on self. When you start to be aware of those judgmental thoughts about yourself, the game changes because you will realize you've just went, oh God, you're so stupid. And then you go, well, hang on, no, whoa, stop. I'm not stupid. I just made a poor choice in that instance, but I can make a different choice next time, but I'm not stupid.
Yes. It's a very important difference.
Yeah. And I would say that's a game changer. That didn't help me get emotions, but that's a completely different thing. But that realizing how much negative self-talk you have, like, is the start, I think. You know what I mean? Because it's there below the radar and it's there all the time and it's there, and you don't know it's there. And so it's, you know, it's like having a silent group of enemies standing around putting shit on you without you being able to hear them, but they're influencing, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I think that was, I'd say, a turning point for me in yeah, that's, you know, I talk about this a lot at clinics and stuff because I think that, and there's a lot more to it, but that there's a big deal. Yeah. But
Yeah.
the not having emotions though, I mean, you know, I did dialectical behavior therapy for a year. That didn't really work. I did some EMDR that helped a little bit.
Did you
I
do the
did,
EMDR with horses at all, or
no,
just in an
no,
office setting?
just
Because
in
there
an
are
office
some
setting.
people out there that do EMDR with horses.
Yeah, we've got a friend of ours who does, I don't know if she does EMDR with horses. Is that my phone? I never have my ringer turned on, and for some reason my ringer's on.
Okay.
And I did a session with a lady we know that does, well, it's not EMDR with horses, but it's equine assisted therapy, and that was pretty interesting. But then I did some EMDR. That was kind of helpful. I also did some work with a somatic experiencing therapist. That was quite helpful. But somewhere in there, I went to Florida and did a 3-day ayahuasca ceremony.
Ooh, tell us about that.
That, golly, scariest thing I've ever done, worst thing I've ever done, best thing I've ever done. But it's like that ayahuasca just opens you up and you just stare into the black hole. And you know, all the stuff about yourself you don't like and all those things that you don't even know you don't, it's revealed to you. And it's pretty interesting. But yeah, what's interesting about that is, like, I think there was 50 people at this thing.
Wow, that seems like a lot.
Yeah, it's a because ayahuasca's illegal. This is it's a religious ceremony. So you join this church called the Soul Church of Mother Ayahuasca, and it's because you're now part of their religion, you can actually receive this sacrament of the ayahuasca. And they have a shaman from South America that comes up and does the whole thing, and everybody there is a therapist. Everybody that facilitates is a therapist, and you have, you know, and you've got a month of homework to do before you go there. This is not a party drug. This is some
Yeah,
serious.
it's a serious thing.
You've got a lot of work to do before you go there. You've got to change your diet for probably 2 weeks before you go there, and you know, and everybody that's there is a therapist. So you have counseling sessions before, you have counseling sessions the next day. You get to talk about what you experienced and stuff like that. It's not a good time. I mean, it is a good time, but it's not. You're not going there to get your rocks off, sort of thing. You know?
Yeah, no, it's not for fun. You're like, what am I gonna do this weekend? I'll take
Not,
some ayahuasca and like journey to the depths of the darkness of my soul. It'll be fine.
yeah. And so I think that was a bit of a quite a part of, you know, what I want to do was, you know, you set intentions going there, and you know, they're your intentions and not somebody else's intentions. And so the two things I really wanted to get out of it was basically face my fears and have a heart opening experience. And I got both of those
Nice.
out of it. So, and it wasn't until the last night I did. The first night, after the first night, I was like, yeah, I've paid all this money to come in here and I got nothing out of that, you know.
Yeah.
But they say you get it's almost like horses. I think you get the horse you need at the time, and with ayahuasca, you get the experience you're ready for at the time.
Yeah.
And so we did 3 ceremonies, and they got deeper as the weekend went on. But that was part of it. And then I was in you know who Dave Asprey is, the Bulletproof coffee guy?
Wait, which one?
Bulletproof coffee.
I think so. I think I've heard of him before.
So Dave Asprey was a Silicon Valley dude, and sold his business when in his 30s for gazillions of dollars, but he'd always been morbidly obese and couldn't lose the weight and had done everything. Some people can't lose weight, but they don't really do much. This guy would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, go to the gym for 3 hours if that's what he had to do. He'd eat what they said to eat and do what they said, and he just couldn't get rid of couldn't lose the weight. So after he sold his business, he had all this money. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna fund research that is not looking for a pill. I want to fund research that gets to the root of it. And one of the things he found was that he was allergic to mold.
Oh, interesting.
And that had a lot to do with his inability to lose weight. And there's a lot of mold in coffee. So the first thing he started doing was making this mold-free coffee. It's called Bulletproof Coffee. He has a podcast called the Bulletproof Radio Podcast. Anyway, he wrote a book. He's written several books, but one of the books he wrote is called Game Changers. And so when he does these, I think he interviewed like 300 people on his podcast. And at the end of his podcast, he says, okay, so what 3 things would you say are game changers for you? Like, what's your 3 bits that you couldn't live without? Things that made the most impact on you. And then he took all those 3 things from the 300 people, combined them all and found the common denominators, and has a book called Game Changers. And every chapter is one of those things that almost everybody did. First chapter, meditation practice. Everybody has a meditation practice. But partway through the book, he says there's a doctor in Silicon Valley, Dr. Cook in Silicon Valley, California, and we live in the bottom end of Silicon Valley, who's doing all this groundbreaking research with stem cells. And what he will do is, if you've got sports injuries, he'll go in there and he'll draw your fat out, spin your own stem cells off and inject them into your joints. And he said, I've had every joint in my body injected. I feel like I'm 19 again. And he had a lot of problems from all the weightlifting and stuff he's doing, trying to lose the weight. He said, but what else he's doing is he will pull off your stem cells and he will inject them into your vagus nerve and give you a complete emotional reset back to factory settings. Look at you're like, what? And I was in Australia at the time, driving around doing clinics, listening to this audio book, and I had to pull over on the side of the road. I'm like, what did he just say? You can get a complete emotional reset without having to go to group therapy and listen to these people once a week? What the hell? And so I get back, I look this guy up. I find out who he is. I make an appointment. I have a phone appointment with him. We talk for an hour. And that injecting your stem cells in your vagus nerve and having an emotional reset, it's called a stellate ganglion block is what it's called.
Interesting.
But he said, and he asked me lots of questions. He said, based on what you've told me, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something different. We won't do the stem cells, but I can help you. We'll do something different. So I make an appointment. I go in there. We have another chat for about an hour, and this dude's fascinating. We're sitting there chatting, and his cell phone beeps at him, and he kind of looks at me and he goes, can you excuse me for just 1 second? He goes out in the hallway, and he's on the phone, and it sounds like he's talking to his kids about a TV show. Someone about a TV show, but he's talking about a TV show. Maybe someone, I don't know what he's talking about. Kind of like water cooler conversation.
Yeah.
Then he comes back in, and he's got this odd look on his face, and he sits down and he looks at me, and I'm like, you okay? He said, have you ever watched the TV show House? Have you ever seen House?
I know of it. Like I think I watched maybe like 10
it's like this.
ever,
It's
but
this.
like, yeah,
It's this doctor, and he's brilliant. He solves the unsolvable sort of thing.
right.
And but he's addicted to Vicodin, and so he's basically a drug addict doctor who's got a very sarcastic wit. But anyway, so he looked at me and said, have you ever watched the TV show House? And I'm like, yeah. And he said, so HBO is creating a new show, a series like that, but it's based on me. And I'm like, so I was just talking to HBO, I was just talking to the director, and I'm like, yeah. And he said, well, they just told me that my character is a sociopath, and I'm sitting here wondering, am I a sociopath? It was pretty cool. But anyway, we had this, conversation, and the reason he was thinking that is because the reason he knew what he was going to do for me is because he's been shut down all his life too. And so that's why, when you have your own emotion, am I a sociopath? But anyway, so then they take me down the hallway, hook me up to a drip of something called NAD. NAD is a cofactor. I don't even know what a cofactor is, but it's something that helps metabolize things or whatever in your body. And you're born with a certain amount of this NAD in your body. And as you age, it depletes. Drinking depletes it. And I used to drink 3 beers a day for 30 years, maybe more on the weekends, but 3 every night sort of thing. Funnily enough, a few years ago, since I started a really good meditation practice, the desire to drink went away.
Nice.
I didn't decide to quit drinking. I just
didn't feel like it anymore.
Didn't feel the need anymore. I didn't even realize it was a need. I thought it was a want, but then I realized, that need I had, it's not there anymore. Anyway, they hooked me up to this drip of NAD, and I was on this NAD for about 4 hours or something, right, slowly dripping into me. And then they had a Qigong energy healer come in the room with me. They hooked me up to a IV of ketamine, and they give me a psychedelic trip on this ketamine. And this is before the ayahuasca. This is my first experience with anything psychedelic. And it's supposed to do the same thing. You're supposed to go offline for 8 hours. Your emotional system will go offline for 8 hours and it will kick back in. So I do that. And it was, I thought I was going to see the face of God, face my fears, whatever. It was just a very, very, very vivid kaleidoscopic dream. It's like I was on a roller coaster and everything was kaleidoscopic and vivid colors. Supposed to last about 40 minutes. Mine was about 20 minutes because my wife was sitting in the room. Felt like it was about 2 minutes. But anyway, so I'm supposed to go offline for 8 hours, and then it's supposed to kick in. And the next morning I wake up, which is more than 8 hours later, nothing. And I've got to go to the airport that afternoon to fly to Washington State to a horse expo. I drove up to San Jose Airport, and I'm sitting in San Jose Airport about 3 o'clock that afternoon, so probably 24 hours after it happened. And all of a sudden, boom, I get this feeling in my chest, and then it goes down and it moves around, and it's almost like there's an alien inside me. And I'm getting sensations in my body I've never had before. And it's not like, oh, I'm going to be sick. It's just like this energy moving around in here. And I'm like, what in the world is going on here? But that's what I had. And that weekend, talking to people, I got these heartfelt feelings, like internal feelings I've never had in my entire life. I tell you what, I've had, for me, up until that point in time, I've experienced being in love, heartbreak, and fear and dread. That's it. Okay. I've had emotions. I've had sensations in here, but it's being in love or heartbreak and fear and dread. That's about the only emotion I've had. But these were totally different, and they came and they went, and they like looking in your eyes, not now, and your eyes are smiling. Things would people do that, and I'd get these things, and it was crazy. And what was interesting is that Horse Expo is in southern Washington State, close to the Oregon border, and around there, everybody takes their dogs everywhere.
Well, including like in Vancouver or something?
Including the horse expos. And I was talking to the organizer, and they said, yeah, the fairgrounds here said they weren't actually going to allow anybody to bring their dogs here. And I said, well, let's not have it, because people around here will not come if they can't bring their dogs. So everybody's leading the dog around, which was cool, because when I go away, I miss my dogs, but I get to have a bit of doggy love from all these different dogs. But I'm sitting in the booth. This is the weird thing. I'm sitting in the booth, and a lady walks past with a cat on a leash. Okay, it's got a little harness on, it's walking along, and that cat stops, turns, looks at me, runs across, jumps across the table, lands in my lap, and goes boom, and sits down and curls up right up against me. And sits there for 45 minutes, won't leave. I'm chatting to the lady, and eventually she's got to pick the cat up by the scruff of the neck, and off they go. And I was like, what in the world was that? I've never had that happen before. And she said the cat doesn't normally do this. And so at the time, I had no idea what it was. But early last year, January last year, I got a chance to microdose mushrooms. for about 10 days. And so you're microdosing them, so you're not really, there's no outward, like, you know, you're not, the walls aren't moving or anything like that. It's just you're microdosing these mushrooms. But our cat, we've got a cat, she's not unfriendly, but she's not friendly. You know, every night I was microdosing the mushrooms, she would sit in my lap and would not get off.
Huh. Fascinating.
And it's like, they can obviously feel something. I could feel it. Microdosing the mushrooms, I'd be watching a TV show and something would happen and I would get like really strong, heartfelt emotions just from something sad happening or something happy happening. You know, it's like, I said to my wife, this is like, have you ever read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and they go to the feelies, they go to the movies, but it's called the feelies because you get plugged into what's going on the screen. It was like that.
Interesting.
And I think that's, you know, I think, especially a lot of women, that's their life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Do.
I said it was like being in 3D. I'm not only seeing the movie and hearing the movie, I'm feeling the movie, and I've not felt that before. And so it was kind of an eye opener to, whoa, what is available? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then
sorry, I rambled on a long time there, but that's
no, it's
that's
fantastic. I love it. It's like the work that we do here in the interviews, it's all about being authentic and just following the journey. It's just like having a cup of coffee between two friends. Like that's what's always been really important to me, because whatever comes up in these conversations is what the listener is meant to hear. That's what I believe.
It's like this conversation is like Mother Ayahuasca.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just like whatever that person is meant to hear at this particular moment in their journey, that's it. And they'll take it.
Go.
Whatever.
Yes, all that stuff was interesting to me because, you know, I grew up in rural Australia and very kind of strict sort of, you know, and people who took drugs were bad people. And I am really convinced that psychedelics in the right circumstances are the future of mental health.
There's a lot going on in that realm right now. I know that in Oregon State there in the US, they're working towards legalizing psychedelics. I don't know if there are other states that are currently doing that as well, but I just, having been a Washingtonian, I heard about that in my travels. And it's really fascinating, and talking to different people that are like psychedelic practitioners, basically, like that they help people through coaching, mental health, through psychedelics, like your journey that you're expressing to us right now. And throughout history, like culturally, there have been different rites of passages for people, which create, like, there's a journey, and people take ayahuasca or a different drug as part of their culture, you know, the rite of passage to find themselves and face their fears and move over into manhood. I don't know if they do the same sort of rites of passages for women in that regard. I'm not as well versed, but I do remember hearing that. And it's interesting because in this day and age, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in the United States, we don't really have rites of passage so much anymore. I mean, other than like, yeah, you can have your driver's license when you're 16 and vote when you're 18 and drink when you're 21. But there's not something that's like really solid in the internal world of what you're experiencing and proving yourself.
Yeah, we talked about this before we started the podcast, but whatever we're on, what are we on?
Blogcast.
Okay, thank you. Last year, I went to a 3-day men's emotional resilience retreat, and it was led by a former serviceman. He spent a number of years traveling around with Tony Robbins, doing all this stuff on stage with Tony Robbins. He's done a deep dive into like Gabor Mate's grief work. And it was an amazing weekend, but he started out the weekend saying in our society, men do not have a rite of passage into manhood. And we basically spend the rest of our life being adolescents. We haven't made that boy to man, that rite of passage. And there was a book that was part of the whole, you know, it was basically the groundwork of the whole weekend. And it's a book called King, Warrior, Lover, Magician. It's like a 4 archetypes thing. And it's called The Hero's Journey.
Yeah.
But so what the king does, the king is the visionary, and he does things for the good of all. You know, the warrior, he's the doer of deeds. The lover brings the feminine to it, brings the emotion to it, and the magician is the, and I was I basically fall in the magician thing because I'm in my head, so I'm, very left brain, right brain, sorry. Which one is it? Analytical.
Analytical. Oh gosh.
Whichever one that it was.
I think it's the right brain.
Right brain. Okay.
I think I'm like, oh man, I have to go back. I'm like, I should remember this. It's like,
and so the magician, he's all the, he's all the detailed sort of thing, but there's a shadow side to each one of those.
Yes.
And so the shadow side of the king is the prince, and this was what really got me. He says the king does things for the good of the kingdom. The prince does things for external validation. And right then, I kind of have this, I'm almost having an existential crisis, because I was sitting there thinking, I have 22 million views on YouTube. Why am I putting this stuff on YouTube? Am I doing this stuff because I want to help people? Or am I doing this stuff because I get all these people go, oh, you're amazing, and yeah, and you helped me. And so I had to kind of really sit and think about it for a minute. And I think and I've talked to other people who are in like the public eye sort of thing about this since then. And they said, yeah, that's like a balancing act you have to do. You can't ignore the fact that you do get external validation for doing these things, and you really have to have a bit of a chat with yourself about, before you do something, why am I doing this? Is this to get a pat on the back, or is this to share some wisdom or knowledge that I have that can empower other people? And you kind of got to have a think about it. And if you have that conversation with yourself before you do something in the public eye, it kind of rules out making some bad decisions that you might not have thought about that they were a bad decision at the time. If you really think, why am I doing this? But it was interesting, like the shadow of, say, the shadow of the lover. No, the shadow of the magician is passive aggressive. The shadow of the lover is depression, or what was the other one? And what was the shadow of the warrior is, I think it's passive aggressive or something else. But it's, like if that energy of yours is not right, if that warrior energy is not right, you end up being passive aggressive. And if the king energy is not right, you're in the prince energy. And if your lover energy isn't right, you're either depressed or you are anxious. I think they might have been the two of that. And then with the magician, you're either, I forget what they were, but it's a fascinating book. And when we just touched on it, but when I came home, I read the whole book, and it's amazing. You're reading a book written by some guy who's never met you, and he knows you inside and out. So the human condition is not all that different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and we had spoken about that too with like the global men summits that I had done, and the different men that I had spoken about, and like the great equalizer, the things that men struggle with around the world. And I know I said that we don't have rites of passage as much in the United States, but the men's movement is starting and it's gaining more momentum. And it is nice to see that there are more men out there that are doing retreats and workshops and having life coaching and mindset coaching for men in particular, and creating their own rites of passage within the retreats, which is fantastic. You have the Rising Man movement in Australia. You have Michael Loria, who I've interviewed before, and he has Excalibur, and he has rites of passage for men there in Australia, where you actually get to forge your own sword as part of the rite of passage, which I think is super cool. And he's written his own book, and he's got a lot of content that's going on. And I think he has a TV show now that's up in the US and Australia, which is super cool. That's newer. There's just a lot more men in general that are doing great things to empower other men, which I'm just so excited about, just all over the world. It's not just in the US or Australia.
Yeah, I'd not really heard much about the men's movement before I went to this thing, and it was just an ad that popped up on Facebook, and whatever the things it said, I'm like, yeah, that I need that. But what I learned there is that, and if any women aren't very familiar with this stuff, you probably think, oh, that's, what are you teaching, toxic masculinity or something or other? But really, toxic masculinity is the king energy all wrong. The
Yeah,
the,
I
the
like to
king
think of
energy
it
has a
more
lot of, sorry, go ahead.
immature.
Yes,
Sorry,
yes, it's the
I like
prince
to think of
energy.
it immature masculinity instead of toxic
Well, yeah,
masculinity, just because I know that's a really big buzzword, the toxicity. But I don't like to think of masculinity in and of itself as being toxic. That's why I
right.
like to use the word immature masculinity versus mature masculinity. And the same thing with femininity. We all have masculine and feminine energy within us, right? And it's just kind of like how we talk about the shadow side of things.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think of
and
like
so
the
that,
immature masculinity is the shadow side of masculinity more so.
yes, exactly. It's basically the prince energy. It's the external validation thing, and yeah, it said it. There's a lot of feminine energy in the king energy if he's doing it right. You know,
Right.
leaders of countries that are attacking other countries and stuff like that. That's prince energy. That is
Yeah.
not king energy. And so, yeah, it was pretty cool. And if there's any men listening to this who haven't looked into this stuff, I've done some therapy. All my therapists have been women, nothing wrong with that. But the thing about going and seeing a therapist, whether it's a man or a woman, like I said, all mine have been women, but you're sitting in a room, I'm sitting in a room with a woman, and I'm being very vulnerable. I'm spilling my guts about what I am comfortable spilling my guts with her about. And she's sitting there nodding very nicely, but she's got no skin in the game.
Yeah.
We went to this, it was actually a 3 and a bit day, a men's emotional resilience retreat, but we got there Thursday afternoon. We have dinner, we meet each other, we have dinner Thursday evening, and then we go into the living room. It was in a big cabin up in the mountains, and we go in the living room, and Joshua, who's running the whole thing, he sits down, he goes, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go around the room, and even though we've met, you're going to introduce yourself, tell us your name, and tell us something that rhymes with your name, just so we can remember your name. And then I want you to tell us something you're ashamed of you've never told a single person in your life. I'll go first. And then he spits out some stuff, and I'm like, holy shit. And then so this is the first thing, you go around the room and you start, and that's the beginning of it. And once you go around there, and then he goes, anybody want to go for round two? And you go around again. I didn't do round two, but it starts out getting where everybody's got some skin in the game and everybody's vulnerable, and it builds on that, and it just builds and builds and builds. And there's something about being in a room full of men who, and spilling your guts to them, and they've spilled their guts to you. And there was 7 of us, I think. One of them is he's an author, podcaster, world renowned couples. He's not a therapist, but a couples
Coach.
coach. Yes. There was one guy there who's a former UN hostage negotiator. There's one guy there he's a filmmaker, and he's on the artistic side of things. So we've got a group of diverse men. And then there's me, and I think my problems are totally different than anybody else's. But when it comes down to it, we all had the same fears. And that was probably the most profound thing about the weekend, is like, oh, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Me too. It's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the thing I think about being vulnerable, is when you can be vulnerable, you think you're going to met with, you're a weirdo, you're going to be ostracized, whatever. But if you're vulnerable to the right people, you don't do it in the wrong place, but if you're vulnerable to the right people, you always get, yeah, me too. You get community, you get
Yeah.
that, you don't get separation, you get connection.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you sharing all of that work and being vulnerable. And you reminded me about when we first began talking about Rupert and the podcast you did with him, and Rupert wrote Horseboy. And that you felt something that shifted inside of you when you spoke to him as well.
Yeah, so Rupert Isaacson wrote The Horse Boy. He has a son who's autistic, and he took him to Mongolia, to the shamans in Mongolia. And, he wasn't trying to fix his autism like there's anything wrong with him, but he was trying to help him with some of the issues he had with it. There was incontinence, and there was no connection with other kids, and there was also, tantrums.
Yeah.
And so he went to Mongolia, and if you've read the book, it's amazing. But he went to the shamans in Mongolia, and the shamans in Mongolia said, you need to take 3 more healing journeys with other shamans. And he ended up going to the Bushmen of the Kalahari. He went to some Australian Aboriginals in the Daintree rainforest. And he went to some Navajo healers in Arizona. And so I had Rupert on my podcast, and the guy, he's one of the most profound human beings I've ever spoken to. It was amazing. And in the podcast, and in there's another book he wrote called The Long Ride Home, it came after The Horse Boy, and it's about the 3 subsequent journeys they went on. But in there, he's talking about the Kalahari Bushmen. They have this. So the Kalahari Bushmen speak a language called Hokosa. It's got a click, Osa. And they have this spot on them that they pull the bad juju out, and it's called a hong spot. Okay. Now, I don't think he mentioned where it was, but he said the hong spot. Anyway, while I was doing this podcast with Rupert, I had something happen in my body. I had a feeling like an emotion. So like something you would feel in the front of your body, but it was between my shoulder blades, right here, like right where my neck attaches to my torso. It was weird. It started out like an emotion there. And then a couple of days later, it kind of just turned into like I'd cricked my neck, but it started out as an emotion. It was the weirdest thing. It's like having an emotion in your toe. You know what I mean? Anyway, so I messaged Rupert, and I said, I thanked him for the podcast or whatever. And I said, you know what? I had something shift inside me when I was talking to you, and I don't know what the hell it is. He goes, well, what happened? And I told him I had an emotion that came out the back of my neck between my shoulder blades. He goes, oh yeah, that's the spot. Like if you've ever done a meditation where you, one of the meditations I will do is when I breathe in, I imagine breathing in my third eye and out the top of my head. Then it comes in the top of my head and out my throat chakra, in there and out there.
Fascinating.
Out my heart. But there's this portal at the top of your head thing. Well, the shamans, the Bushmen don't think it comes in and out there. They think it comes in and out there. That's the spot where that energy goes in and out, which I didn't know this when this thing happened, but I tell Rupert later, and he goes, that's that spot. That's where good things go in and bad things get sucked out of. And it happened during the conversation with him. And what was funny is 2 days later, I was outside washing the horse trailer, and by this point in time, it felt like I was kind of out, and you're a body worker, you might be telling me what this was. It felt like I'd slept wrong. And then all of a sudden I bent over and it dropped, and it went down, hit me in the lower back, and my back, I was screwed. I couldn't walk. When your lower back goes out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it started as an emotion up here. Then it turned into like something was out of whack there. And then boom, it was, I'm not going to say it's weird. It was what it was. That's how it goes these days. But
well, it's like your emotional center, like your chakra is like in your stomach, right? And then it comes out your low back. So so the emotions are there, and then it went to the center of your like emotional body.
Yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, Rupert Isaacson was, talking to that guy, it was just, I've had so many people contact me about that podcast and go, it's life before talking to Rupert and life after talking to Rupert. And even people have said there's life before listening to Rupert on the podcast, and like they didn't talk to him, but he is just one of those people, and I'm so fortunate that the universe pops them up in front of me and I get to interact with them. So it's pretty cool.
No, that definitely is cool. I'll have to take a listen to it because I did do the Horseboy 1 training with Rupert years ago. And so it'll be fun to listen to him. And now I'm like, oh, I need to reach out to Rupert and see if he wants to be on my podcast. And that would be really fun to reconnect.
Yeah, I was lucky to get him on because I think he'd had a bit of a separation from the public space for a
Oh,
while. I think it all got a little bit too
interesting.
much. Yeah. So he took a step back. But there's a lady that follows my stuff who has uh, an equine assisted therapy, two equine assisted therapy centers here in California that deal specifically with autism.
Yeah.
And she follows my stuff. And she said, you know what? You should really. Oh, she sent me the book, The Long Ride Home. So people send me books all the time. They'll show up in the mail. And I'm like, oh, someone sent me a book. That's really cool. So I've got some amazing books. But that one showed up. I'm like, oh, whatever. I'll get to that. Looks like a good story. And then, a couple of weeks later, she messages me about, I forget what she messaged me about. And then
She's
she
like,
said,
did you read the book?
she may have mentioned that, but she wasn't checking up on me to see if I'd read the book. But she messaged me about something. And I said, no, I haven't read it yet. She goes, you know what you should do? You should watch the movie The Horseboy. So I'm like, okay. I watched the movie The Horseboy. I'm like, I got to talk to this dude. So she hooks me up with him on WhatsApp. So yeah, he agrees to come on the podcast. So then I'm like, okay, who is this dude? He's the guy that had the book The Horseboy. Then I start looking into all things Rupert Isaacson. Oh God, it's like now I'm scared because this guy's a way bigger deal than I thought. He was just the guy that they made a documentary about, blah blah. And what funny. I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. If you've listened to Brene Brown's
I have.
books,
I love her. I
she
finally
talks
listened
about
to her. Yeah, this last trip.
my friend Kristen Neff is his ex-wife. She's the mother of the horseboy. So there's like all my worlds just got kind of tied together at once. But when I researched a bit more about him and realized, holy cow, this guy is, I thought he was just the guy that did the movie. And I went to Mongolia January last year with my son, and we crossed parts of the Gobi Desert in the dead of winter on camels,
Wow.
staying in nomadic tents with nomadic herders every night. It took us
Amazing.
10 days to do. We crossed about 300 kilometers of the Gobi Desert. And so what I really wanted to talk about was going to Mongolia with your son sort of thing. It wasn't really, about all of this other stuff. And I have a huge interest in the Kalahari Bushmen too. So that's what I
Yeah.
wanted to know about. I wanted to know about that stuff as well. So, but there was, Rupert is banned from Botswana because he helped the Bushmen there. He took the Bushmen from the Kalahari who had been dispossessed of their land. He took them all the way to the UN and got this court case to where they were given their tribal lands back in Botswana. And
That's so awesome.
the Botswanan government has banned him from going to Botswana again because they lost all this land to the Bushmen. Like
Wow.
Rupert's a big deal, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
that's awesome.
I didn't realize that before I got him on the podcast, but having him on there, like he's a big deal, but not because of that anymore. It's just like the guy is just so wise. Yeah, just amazing human being.
That's
Oh, I know
fantastic.
what I was going to tell you. So I get Rupert. We're recording this podcast thing. The conversation is going splendidly. We are an hour in, and I've got the platform that I record my podcasts in is called Squadcast, and it's 4 podcasts. There's 2 channels, like his channel and my channel, so we can adjust the mics and stuff later on. And it's like a split screen. We can see each other just like we can here.
Yeah.
The video is not recorded, just the audio.
Okay.
And let's say we've got to stop for a reason. I'll press stop, and then it'll come up and it renders that section. You can see it's there. You could play it back right then if you wanted to, or you can keep recording, whatever. So we're chatting away. After about an hour, all of a sudden, bloop, the whole thing kind of dies and crashes, or he can hear me, but I can't hear him, or something or other. And then the hour-long conversation we've had, instead of rendering, it goes into this spinning wheel of death, where it's not there, and I've got to wait for it to think. Anyway, we can't get this thing working. We spend probably an hour getting it working again, and we restart the whole thing. And I say, oh, I'm sorry, Rupert. He goes, oh, that's perfectly normal. He said, I said, what do you mean? He goes, I said, I don't know what happened. He goes, oh, I know what happened. He said, we have taken film crews to video shamans healing people, and you ask them, can you? And some of them say no, but some of them say yes. But some of them that say yes say, you can try and film this if you like. But a lot of times, perfectly good cameras will go dead, or they'll film and there'll be nothing on it. There's something about this energy that interferes with electronics.
Mm-hmm.
And if I go on that Squadcast platform and I go to the first recording of Rupert Isaacson right now and click on it, it's still in the spinning wheel of death.
Craziness.
It's crazy. But yeah, he said that's quite common with the shamans, with that energy. It's something to do with the energy field, but the electronics doesn't. Or you'll take film cameras, you'll take pictures, and there will be nothing on them.
Craziness.
Yeah, very much so.
That's so fascinating. And then you and I have another mutual friend who I'm going to be interviewing here on Tuesday, Nishan Cook.
Oh my goodness, Nishan Cook. So he popped up on my radar. Someone shared a post that he'd written. It was just written on my Facebook group, and what this guy said, it wasn't a very long post, but what he said was profound. I'm like, I don't know who the hell this guy is, but I got to talk to him. So I find him on Facebook and send him a message and said, would you like to be on my podcast? He's like, yeah, sure. So I get him on the podcast. I know nothing about this guy. I know nothing how old he is, his ethnicity, anything he does. I just know he's a horse guy and he wrote something profound. And I felt like I was talking to a prophet. And I'm not exaggerating. I felt like I was sitting and listening to the Sermon on the Mount. This guy, I said to him, how old are you? Like, he said, well, I'm 34 or whatever he is. I'm like, no, really? Like, are you 300 or 3,000? Because you're one of them.
He's amazing. It's true.
It's like when he starts talking, it's like he's channeling, he's tapped into the divine or something, right? Because the stuff that comes out of his mouth, you can't get that in 34 years. I mean, some of it became obvious why he came. Like when he was at college, his mentor was Martin Luther King's speechwriter.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. But you still cannot put all that stuff in 34 years. He's
serendipitous how things and people come into our lives at particular points. It's just remarkable. And speaking of that, your own journey in regards to connecting energy, like with horses, like being like your own training with horses, what was that like, your evolution?
Yeah, there wasn't really an evolution. There was just a stepping off a ledge. My wife bought about 5 years ago, my wife bought a reining horse, and he was a superstar athlete, but they couldn't, what we would call in the reining world, get him shown, which means you can do all this stuff, but it doesn't quite work in the show ring.
Okay.
And it was because he'd like spook at the judges' chairs and things like that, you know. And so he was priced in, I couldn't afford the superstar, but I could afford him where he was priced because he has these little quirks. And I'm like, well, I can fix that stuff. You know, because at the time I'm traveling around the world doing clinics. People listen to what I say. The horses listen to what I say. My YouTube channel's got, it was 5 years ago. Maybe it had 15 million views. I'm not sure. But, you know, I'm starting to believe my own BS. And I'm thinking I can fix anything. And so we buy this horse and we get him home, and he's very, very shut down. And the reason he has problems in the show ring is because he carries a level of tension that doesn't allow him to be fluid, and that prevents all this athletic ability from coming out. And I can't do anything with him. I mean, I can do anything I want with him as far as obedience, but as far as getting him to turn loose of that tightness that he had, nothing I had been doing that worked with every horse I'd ever worked with this horse. And so I didn't beat a dead horse, so to speak. I didn't keep trying because I can't help him. So I'm going to step away from trying to make him any different, leave him as he is, and see if I can figure some things out. And he kind of got me open to, I wouldn't say new stuff, because I'd always been learning stuff. You know, it's a process. You know, something you do this year, you might change it next year because you see a better version of that. You're always updating different techniques and different things you do.
Sure.
But I think all of that, I was always looking for more techniques to create more obedience. And
Yeah.
obedience was
I
not
love
the
one of your
answer.
quotes that I read, that it's a direct correlation to this, that is, light is responsiveness, but soft is mentally good with it. And
Yeah,
so it
yeah.
sounds like
Lightness is,
he was
yeah,
light, but he wasn't soft because
yep.
he wasn't mentally prepared for what it was that you were asking.
Yeah, he was doing it. He would do it,
Yeah.
but mentally he was probably kind of a bit mentally checked out while he was doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and so he kind of must have got me to just start to look at things a little bit differently, just the crack. And that kind of, in the space of about 2 years, I had a lot of serendipitous things happen that kind of blasted me off into a totally different realm. And so these days I'm really about connection first. And I'll tell you what, I had an incident at a clinic in Texas probably a year later. So I don't think anything major happened for about a year. And I'm at a clinic in Texas, and there's a lady's got this Mustang, and he's 9 years old, been out of the wild for 6 years. He does all the groundwork. You can ride him. He just has this random bolting problem. And her trainer's there, and she's handy, and I said, so what caused him to bolt? What's the trigger? Because you don't fix the bolt, you fix the
Right.
cause. And she said, it's really random. Like it doesn't, something that causes it one day won't cause it the next day. And she said, I can't figure it out. And, I'm like, well, I don't know how to help that either. Because if we can figure out what causes it, I can help you with that, but I don't fix bolting. I usually try to sort out the cause. And it was
Sure.
a three-day clinic, and I know, it's funny, I don't normally do 3-day clinics, but this one was. But the first day, I don't even remember this horse. I did some groundwork of some sort, but I don't really remember him. So it was that, blasé. The second day, his owner, Hannah, she's doing some groundwork, and she's working on disengaging him. So she wants to walk down the near side of him and then change her energy and suggest he moves his hind end over away from her. Pretty simple. And she'd been working on it for a bit. And then she turns to me and she says, hey, he's starting to block me out. So she's in front of him. And as she goes to walk down beside him, he kind of turns his head and blocks her out. And in the past, if a horse did that to me, I'll use my microphone as a horse's head, I would just reach under their jaw and go, excuse me.
Sure.
I mean, there's his left eye, here's his right eye. I would just reach under and put me in his left eye without moving my feet. Because at the time I was like, if I walk around you, I lose. You make me move my feet, I lose, because this is a bit of a competition. This is that dominance theory stuff that I no longer believe in. But instead of doing that, I'd read something that triggered something. Instead of doing that, when he blocked me out and turned his head over there, I stepped back. I stepped back to say, I saw your concern. I see you. And I waited there until he showed me some sign of relaxing, whether maybe he stopped blinking. When horses get tense, their rate of blinking slows down, and maybe he got the stares, or maybe he'd gone internally, his ears didn't move. Maybe I waited for one ear to move. I don't know what it was, but I stepped back until he felt better about it. And then I went to walk down there again, and he blocked me out. So I stepped back to my original position and waited for him to relax. And I did that for, it's probably 5 or 10 minutes, just acknowledging, not fixing, but acknowledging that he was telling me he was slightly concerned about me going down there for whatever reason, I don't know.
Yeah.
But after 5 or 10 minutes, I can walk down that side of him, and he doesn't block me out. I'm like, okay. Now he's been ridden for 6 years, so I figure I could touch him with not too much problem. So I just reach out to put my hand on his neck, just in front of his wither. And as I do, his head raises very slightly, like maybe 1/4 of an inch, but he tenses up very slightly. So I took my hand away and stepped back and basically said, I saw that too. And at this point in time, I've got no idea what I'm doing. This is kind of maybe intuition at this point in time, but I got no idea what I'm doing.
That's a feeling.
Yeah. So I do that for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. And after 5 or 10 minutes, I can walk around the front of him, walk down the side. He doesn't block me out. I can touch him on the neck. He doesn't block me out. So I'm like, okay, so now I'm going to disengage him. And I bet if I disengage him once and then go back to the front and walk down the side, he'll block me out because he doesn't want us disengaging him for some reason. So I disengage him, and he does that fine because he's been taught how to do it. I go back to the front. I walk down the side. He lets me disengage him. I thought, well, I'm just going to do it again. I walk down there, disengage him. I do it 10 times and he won't block me out. And I'm like, well, I wonder what the hell that was, because he was kind of saying, I don't want you to disengage me. But then when I was disengaging him, he didn't say, I don't want you to disengage me. So maybe disengaging wasn't the problem. You know what I mean? I'm kind of like, I wonder what that was. So I hand him back to Hannah, his owner, and she said, what do you want me to do? And I said, oh, I'd just hang out. Just let him process that for a minute. I go out and helping someone else. And about 10 minutes later, there's a collective from everybody in the clinic. And I turn and look, and this horse has, boom, his knees are buckled and he's gone down on his belly and he's snoring little dust clouds. His head's straight up and down in the dirt. He's on his belly with his legs underneath him, snoring little dust clouds. Then he has a roll, gets up, shakes, and then boom, down he goes again. And I said to Hannah, is that normal? And she looks at me and she says, I've had him for 6 years and I've seen him lay down once. And he was way out in the pasture. And when I showed up on the horizon, he jumped up. But no, he doesn't ever lay down. And I'm like, well, I don't know what just happened, but something happened just then.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I was doing, but something just happened. Anyway, at the time, I used to have a morning group and an afternoon group, and she was in the morning group. And this was about 10:30, and he slept for about an hour and a half till lunchtime. We had to wake him up.
Lots of processing for him.
Takes him, puts him back in the stall, comes in the next day for the morning group at 8 o'clock in the morning. And she said, what do you want me to do? And I said, just hang on to him and see what he does. She holds on to him. About 20 minutes later, boom, down he goes and sleeps for 4 hours, does not move. Horses are cantering around him, the loudspeakers going, people are clapping. He doesn't move. He's unconscious. And so I knew from that something happened. What happened? I don't know what happened. But something happened. Anyway, so I came home and I thought, well, I'm going to look up sleeping habits of horses and things like that. Well, we all know horses can sleep standing up and they sleep laying down. But what I didn't know was horses can only have a light sleep standing up. And in order to get enough REM sleep, to get that deep restorative sleep that we need, they have to lay down.
How interesting. I didn't
And
actually realize that.
in order to lay down like that, they have to feel safe.
Yeah, that I didn't know.
And so I realized what I'd done was I said, I see you. I'm present enough here. I saw that little level of concern and I told him enough. And finally he's like, if you see that, you'd probably see a predator. So I trust you enough to, down he goes. The end story of that is that was 4 years ago and he hasn't bolted since.
Wow.
So that was one of those things that was the first thing that happened from, I wasn't doing things differently, but I was looking for things. I was searching for things. And I think that was from an article I read.
Yeah.
I forget who wrote the article, but, and it didn't tell me what to do with a bolting Mustang at a clinic that blocks you out when you got to disengage them. But it was about,
it wasn't that specific?
No, it was about listening to them when they tell you they have a slight bit of concern. Instead of trying to fix it, it was listening. And so that became that was the start of the connection stuff that I do now. It's all about listening. It's all about, and I've really got into polyvagal theory the last couple of years, and that explains why these things work like this. It's because it's that attunement, which Daniel Siegel, who's a UCLA professor of psychology, has written some really good books. He calls the sense of being and seeing, being seen and being heard. And there's a trauma therapist from Canada I know named Sarah Schlotti, and she goes one step further. She says attunement is the sense of being seen, being heard, feeling felt, and getting gotten. And all mammals seek that. And
like the core of everything I do right there.
Yeah. And so I think the universe kind of aligned those two things up for me to give me the big slap up the side of the head. Because quite frankly, my life's not been the same since. Because when you see that, you can't unsee it. That's the first time it's the first time I've ever affected a change in a horse where I didn't teach him the change. I didn't train the change. I didn't correct anything. It was not correction, it was connection. And yeah, it's one of those things that's, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And since then, I've had a number of horses at clinics, quite a few horses at clinics that will just lay down and go to sleep. And it was funny. Last September, October, I was I was at a show in Southern California in Indio, and we're in the trailer. We've got a living quarter trailer, so we're there on the fairgrounds. And Rob and I had dinner, and we're sitting. So it's like 8:30 at night time, and my phone rings, and I never answer my phone. Okay, my ring is always off. That's why I was surprised I made a noise a minute ago. I never answer my phone, and I never see it ring. But I must have been, maybe I was looking at it, and a number comes up and it's ringing. I'm like, "Hello, this is Warwick," and this lady says, and she sounds like she's elderly. She says, "Oh, hi, I'd like to come to one of the clinics where the horses lay down." And I'm like, "Excuse me?" She goes, I've seen stuff on Facebook where you have these clinics where horses lay down. I'd like to come to one." I'm like, "Well, it doesn't work that way. I don't ask the horses to lay down. Sometimes they do." She goes, "Well, I want to come to one of those." I said, "Well, but there's no guarantee a horse is going to lay down. There's no expectation of a horse laying down. There's no asking a horse to lay down." And I'm thinking, oh, this poor lady's just a bit feeble-minded, maybe. She sounds like you know, maybe she doesn't have all the faculties, but she was really interested in these horses laying down. And this goes on for about half an hour. And then finally she goes, "Oh, my name's Carolyn Resnick." Do you know who Carolyn Resnick is?
Oh, I sure do.
I'm talking to bloody Carolyn Resnick. And she says, "My name's Carolyn Resnick." I'm like,
You're like,
oh my God. And it's like, this person has been doing this connection work for 40 years.
yeah.
I mean, I am just, I'm a mere babe in the woods as far as having experience with it. I've been doing it for a couple of years now, and all of it is basically just guesswork, maybe intuition. But then when I started learning about polyvagal theory, it's like, yeah, okay, that's why it works. Now I know. And understanding polyvagal theory really helped me refine what I do, because now I know why it works. I know what causes it.
Yeah.
So now I can refine that bit. But so I'm going to have Carolyn on the podcast here soon. But talking to someone who's spent their life doing this stuff, it's kind of cool. And a lot of people are being exposed to it because of me, and they kind of look up like, "Yeah, he's the connection guy." I'm like, "Oh, I don't know anything about it." I just, I think my journey has been to where I was mainstream enough for a long time to get a large number of people maybe believe I know what I'm talking about, or interested in what I have to say. And then as things have gone along and I've gone into this, I've exposed them to that. But I'm not the originator of any of this stuff by any means, but I think it might be a bit of a conduit to help people, because that on its own, you're your average horse rider and you see, let's say, Carolyn Resnick stuff. Yeah, that's weird. You know what I mean? It's too far removed from where a lot of horse people are. But I kind of made that journey from there to, I'm not where she is by any means, but, into that realm. And so it's kind of like I'm kind of standing at the door going, "Hey guys, come and have a look at what's in here." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's, there's quite a number of people that have been introduced to this stuff because of my interest in it, and they've gone way, 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 way in the rabbit hole. And you've got to figure out what your purpose is. And I don't think my purpose is to become some enlightened being and be so far down there I'm not relevant to the average horse person, really. I mean, I really feel like my purpose here is to be credible enough to have people believe what I say, and then stand at the door and go, "Hey, have a look in there. There's some cool stuff happening over there." But I don't think I'd be doing anybody any favors if I just went full on down there, and because then there's no bridge. You know what I mean?
You don't want to go full on woo woo?
Oh, yes, but I do. Hey, you do, yeah, you do 3-day ayahuasca ceremony. There's no coming back from seeing what's in there too, and I don't mean.
No, you made the jump. You made the jump. Um, one of the things that I loved that I've read on about your stuff is that you're open to making mistakes, and you're open to creating a safe space for the people that you connect with and work with their horses, that they can make mistakes. And I think that's such an important thing for people to remember these days, because there's so much shame about the concept of like being wrong or not knowing everything. And especially in the evolution of horsemanship, right? Because you could learn your whole life about horses, and it's as you learn things, then what you might have done previously is most likely going to be wrong, right?
Yeah. And, it's kind of like we talked about that imposter syndrome thing before. When you realize that the people that have their stuff together, like your heroes sort of thing, when you hear that they have it too, you're like, oh, well, it's okay to have that.
Yeah.
It's all right to kind of doubt yourself. But, there's imposter syndrome, but then there's the truth too. And where I get a bit of that imposter syndrome from is like, I'll present at a horse expo or be on someone's podcast, and for some reason they will say, introducing one of the world's greatest horsemen. And I'm like, no. The world's best horsemen you've never heard of. They're not out there telling people about it. They're in the middle of Nebraska doing it. You know what I mean?
I do.
And so it's like, hey,
They're the
I might,
nomads in Mongolia that no one ever hears about.
yeah,
Like,
it's like, hey, I can do some stuff. I'm well publicized. Maybe I'm I'm not the most publicized horseman. If you want to say that, it wouldn't give me the heebie-jeebies. But when they say one of the world's best horsemen, I'm like, oh God, I can walk down the road and show you a better horseman. I can go 5 miles from my house and show you a better horseman. So that kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies just a little bit. But I don't, I think imposter syndrome is when you act like you are one thing and then you feel you're not that. I don't act like I don't say I'm that. So if somebody else says it, it weirds me out a bit, but I don't really get all imposter syndrome-y. But, something that I have found, and, a lot of it's about being comfortable in your own skin, but there's something I've found on this journey is I've gotten more comfortable in my own skin when I have stopped being who I thought other people think I should be. And let me say that one again. Who I think other people think I should be.
that's a big
I
deal.
don't even know if they even think that, but I think they think that. And then you're trying to be someone that you think they want you to be or think you should be.
Or just beating yourself up because you're not that person that you think that person thinks you should be.
Yeah. And as I've been able to let go of that, I'm just a whole lot more comfortable in my own skin.
That's a really cool thing. So how do you create that space for the people that you're working with, for them to feel safe to make a mistake so that they can be more present with their horse?
Same thing I'm doing here. Tell them all my screw ups. Tell them, a lot of times at clinics, I'll start out and give an abridged version of stuff we've talked about here. The talking at the horse expo, the feeling exhausted, then looking into the therapy and the whole guilt, shame, judgment, yada, yada, yada stuff. And then what I used to do with horses, what I do with now, so I tell them, hey, it's okay to look at things differently than you used to. It's okay that's part of the thing. And, our little saying and stuff from my business is enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
It's making sure they realize it's a journey. I mean, I have a tattoo on my wrist here of an unalome. You know what unalome is?
I don't think
It's
I
a
do.
Buddhist symbol symbolizing your journey to enlightenment.
Oh, I think I have seen that before.
So it starts out a spiral. Okay. So
Yeah.
you've got no idea where you're going. You're spiraling around. And when you finally figure out your direction, you start going in the direction, but then you're going and then you double back. And then you get a bit further and then you go in the wrong way. And then you get a bit further, then you go in the wrong way. And as you go further and further, your double backs get less and less. And eventually you straighten out and that little dot at the end.
Yeah, that sounds like my life.
That's enlightenment. But even talking to people about that, that's how it goes. You know what I mean? There's a really good book that I recommend to people called Mastery by a guy named George Leonard. And it's about mastering anything. He was an Aikido master. And in that book, he talks about when you start any new endeavor, like a sport or whatever. Let's say my finger is down here. This is a graph. So this is skill. This is time. Okay. So you
Okay.
start out here and you learn something new. So, well, you've got more skill in your head. But then for some reason it drops off.
You
And
got
then
50.
you're on this plateau where it's just flat for quite a long time. And then, oh, you'll get better. And then you seem to get worse. And then it's flat for a long time. And then you get better. And then you get worse. And then it's flat for a long time. What happens on that plateau is that's where you are building skill, working on the same thing over and over, which will give you the skill for your next upward surge. And
It's
then
like
you'll
you're
drop down.
building a foundation of a house.
Yeah. And so the thing he talks about this plateau is, he says you have to look, he said, seeing you spend in the journey of mastering anything, you have to know you're going to spend most of your time on the plateau. You don't have upward surges all the time. You go up, down, and then there's a long flat plateau. Then there's an up, down, and then there's a long flat plateau. He said, so you need to learn to love the plateau. You need to enjoy the plateau. You need to enjoy doing the work for the work's sake, not for the outcome. And he says, you know, one of the most ancient spiritual practices of the Hindus, so one of the most ancient spiritual, one of the most spiritual, the ancient Hindu practices is karma yoga. And karma yoga is applying yourself to a task with no thought as to the outcome of that task, otherwise known as being present. And that's the same thing. I tell people that all the time because, like, my horse, I just don't seem to be getting any better. That's normal, because people tend to beat themselves up because it's not going right.
Or not going fast enough?
Well, the thing is, they think it's not going right because it's not going fast enough. What you got to realize is, if it goes fast, it will go south in a hurry. If you know that you are supposed to not get any better for a long time before you do get better, then you go, okay, I'm good with it. You know, it's kind of like when I do a clinic, a lot of times at the start of the clinic or even a horse expo, I'll ask people, does anybody here meditate? And a number of people will put their hand up and I say, has anybody here tried to meditate and can't? Everybody sticks their hand up. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to go along and ask some of you why you think you can't meditate. Why can't you meditate? Well, I can't get my mind to stop thinking about things. Why can't you? Oh, my mind's too busy. What about you? Oh, I can't still my mind. What about you? And it's all kind of the same answer. And I said, I like to quote an American philosopher named Wayne Dyer. And he says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. I said, I'm about to change your mind about the fact you think you can't meditate. I said, does your meditation sound something like this? This is what your brain sounds like when you meditate, okay? So you're going to focus on your breathing and you want to be aware of the air going in your nostrils. You want to be aware of your belly expanding, contracting, the air going in your nostrils. So does it sound something like this? Okay, the air is going in my nostrils. My belly's expanding. My belly is contracting. Oh, my belly feels like it's hungry. I wonder what's for dinner. I think I'm having chicken. I wonder when that chicken was alive, was it a boy chicken or a girl chicken? I mean, you know, I wonder how they tell. I mean, you know, when they're big, you can tell a boy chicken from a girl chicken, but what about when they're those little yellow things? How do you tell a boy chicken from a girl chicken? You know, like the ones you see at Easter time. Easter time, I love Easter because I get to eat chocolate and I love chocolate. Oh, shit, hang on. I'm supposed to be thinking about my breathing. I suck. I can't meditate. Everybody says, yes, that's exactly how it goes. I said, well, there is this dude named Eckhart Tolle who's a bit of a spiritual leader, and he says, when you become aware that you are not present, you are present. I said, there's a book I read called Mind Hacking by a fellow named Sir John Hargrave. And he has a different take on meditating. He says, sit down and meditate, and every time you realize that you're not focusing on your breathing, give yourself a point, because you have just become present. You are thinking about dinner, chicken, boy chickens, girl chickens, little yellow chickens, Easter, chocolate. Oh, hang on. I'm thinking about chocolate and I'm supposed to be right at that very instant. Give yourself a point because you just became present right then. And I said, so what happens is, how do all of you people know that you suck at meditating? Because at some point in time, you became present enough to realize you weren't thinking about your breathing. And right then you said, I suck. Whereas right then you should go, I was doing it right. And it's the same with that plateau thing. If you understand what the journey looks like, and it's not a straight line, then when you are not on the straight line, instead of wishing it were otherwise, you're like, this is how it's supposed to be. Everything is perfect right now.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think that's the secret right there, is to understand what it looks like. It's ugly. It's like the caterpillar, you know, it breaks before it turns into a butterfly. It doesn't, I mean, it's not born a butterfly.
Absolutely. Oh, so many things.
Sorry, I get a bit, I
Oh
start
no,
channeling something.
I love it. It's fantastic. But it's just, connection is so important and so profound, and the simplicity of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes as humans, I feel like we just make things so much more complicated than they need to be.
Yeah, well, like say what I was just talking about right then, then you start in this self-judgment, like, well, why am I not getting any better? Why is it not a straight line? Why I must have, but if you realize that's how it's supposed to go, then you're fine with it. You don't complicate it. You don't try to make it something it's not. You can accept it. And I think learning how to accept rather than fight what's going on is quite a good skill. I've been taking cold showers for a couple of years now, and I actually have an ice bath. I have an ice chest in the garage that I have full of water, and I take ice baths most days.
Props to you for that.
And it's well, the reason I started doing it for depression, because when you're depressed, you're in your head. When you're in an ice bath, you're very, very bloody aware you're in an ice bath. Let me tell you.
Yes.
But the thing about it is, if you fight it, it is horrible.
Yeah.
It is painful. If you wish you weren't there, it's the longest 2 minutes of your life. It's only 2 minutes I get in there for. But if you learn to accept it.
Give in.
Yeah. Well, it's not so much give in, like in case you think give up. It's just accept it. It's just.
I guess I look at it more like giving in is not so much necessarily giving up, but more of the acceptance aspect.
Yeah.
That's the way that I was looking at that more so.
And it really, it's like helpful with the horses. Like, okay, my horse is standing on his hind legs. Good. He's standing still. He's just standing still on two legs. But, it's acceptance. It's rather than judging it as something other and making up a story about it,
Yeah, no, definitely. And that actually leads me into my next question, which is, some people say that their horse is being bad, and they're shaming their horse or they're shaming themselves because there's something non-ideal occurring. So how do you help people to not put those negative connotations onto their horse and rather communicate about potentially like mixed messages or confusion or whatnot?
That's where that judgment practice I talked about before. It's really hard to not judge your horse if all day long you judge everything that comes in front of your eyes, including yourself. We all do it. It's a human condition. So I'm not pointing my finger at anybody who's very judgmental and saying you're a bad person. But that judgment just flies below the radar. And, when I was the first night we talked about judgment in the therapy thing, they said, what we want you to do right now, we'll go around the room and each one of you identify 3 objects in the room. I didn't even know this was about judgment at the time. And I said, okay, there's a chair, there's a funny looking lamp, and and they said, whoa, 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 whoa. That is not a funny looking lamp. That's a lamp. You think it's funny looking. That's a judgment. Shit, I didn't even know I did that. There's so much of that. And it's so easy to create a story about what your horse is doing rather than see exactly what he is doing. I had a clinic in Australia a few years ago, and there was a lady that was a late addition to the clinic, and she wasn't supposed to be in the clinic, and she kind of, can I get in? Can I get in? Like, well, you're not really supposed to be in here. You're kind of a plus one. but please, please, please. And so my people-pleasing tendencies came to the front, and I said, yeah, sure, you can. But I said, she was in the afternoon group, and I said, you're going to be the last person I get to. I'm going to go through everybody one at a time, and you're going to be the last one I get to. But you watched this morning, so you watched the groundwork this morning. I want you to start trying that groundwork with your horse. And so she goes over in the corner, and I'm helping these other people, most of them who are ridden, are on horseback. And after about half an hour or so, there's a lady in the stands who's watching, and she stands up and raises both hands. She goes, stop. Aren't you going to stop that? I'm like, stop what? She goes, that over there. She points to the corner where the lady's over there with the horse, and I look over there, and the lady's standing there, and the horse is standing over there, and she's got the lead rope, And I said, what do you want me to stop? She goes, that horse is rearing up. I said, really? She goes, yes, that horse. And like, she's really in a state, this lady. That horse is rearing up. I'm like, okay. So why are you so excited about that? She goes, well, he's rearing up. I said, what was she asking him to do? She said, well, she was asking him to go around her in a circle like you were doing with those other horses this morning, and he's rearing up. I said, what would you think of that situation if she asked him to go off around her and he wouldn't move? He just stood there and looked at her. How would you feel about that? She goes, well, I don't know. I suppose it'd be all right. I said, well, do you realize when he's rearing up, he's doing just that. He's just doing it on 2 legs instead of 4. That's all it is. He's standing still. He's not going anywhere. I said, is there somewhere in your mind you're thinking, but if I was out on the trail riding that horse and he did that, it would be dangerous? She goes, well, yeah. I said, but she's not. She's standing over there and he's standing on 2 legs. She goes, well, what if he lands on her? I said, is he rearing up and walking forward, or is he just rearing up? And she said, no, he's just rearing up. I said, well, it's kind of like geometry sort of thing, but if, use this pair of scissors, if you're standing here and a horse is there, when he rears up, is he closer or further away from you? She goes, well, he's further away. And I said, yeah. She's actually probably safer when he rears up. I said, you are just creating a story about what might happen that's not actually happening and isn't going to happen, but you think it might happen. And think about if you were on the end of that lead rope, how that energy caused by you creating stories about something that's not really happened, how that energy would affect that horse. I said, what you'd probably do is the horse would rear up and you'd think, oh my God, I'm going to die. And you would run backwards and you would pull the horse forwards. And now, not only does my horse rear up, he rears up and comes at me. He needs to be put down. And all that comes from the story you were telling yourself about what's going on. If you just the facts, ma'am, what is happening? He's standing still on 2 hind legs. That's all that's happening. All the rest of that other stuff is a story. And the worse the story, the worse your energy, the more influence you have over the horse, and the more you will create the thing that you don't want, which is conflict. And that's, so I tell that story a lot because a lot of people kind of look at me like, I never thought of it that way. But they don't get any closer to you. And like I've had people say, well, what if he lands on it? I said, well, the best thing to do when a horse rears up is not run forward and lay on the ground where their front feet were when they reared up, and then they probably won't land on you. Does that make sense? And I'm not trying to shame people or anything, but I do want people to look through the veil of that judgment that we all have and those stories that we create, because that's a big one. Horses rearing up like that will really make people create stories.
Yeah.
But he was just standing still on 2 legs instead of 4. That's all it was. And that really, people kind of go, wow, I do have a big story. And yes, I was thinking if that was my horse and I was riding him out on the trail and he did that, that would scare the hell out of me. But she's not riding him. She's not on the trail. He's not coming forward. It's really nothing to be concerned about. Yeah. At this point in time. So it's just about, so that's that non-judgmental stuff, just being, like if you can accept that, and I don't mean accept it as in, yeah, it's a good thing, but not buy into it, not react to it. Go, just observe it. Go, okay, he happens to be standing on his hind legs and asked him to go off around me.
So what was the scariest moment that you've had with one of your personal horses?
Personal horses? I don't know if I've had any scary moments with personal horses.
Or it could be with somebody else's. And like,
okay, well, I can tell you that one. I'm a big believer in manifesting. And a couple of years ago, I've been a lot of places around the world, really cool places doing clinics. And so I kind of one day thought, I'm going to put it out there. I would like to be invited to go somewhere in the world, unlike anywhere I've ever been, to go work with some horses. Let it go. About 2 months later, I had an email from the wife of the British ambassador to Morocco. So my wife and son and I went to Morocco for a week. We stayed in the British ambassador's residence.
That's amazing.
Had a dinner in our honor, a 16-table dinner with the white-coated, the personal chefs and the whole bit. Got driven around in the Range Rover with the diplomatic plates, with the former SAS soldier driving us around, and got to go to the races at Casablanca and just all sorts of amazing things. And I got to work with a lot of stallions there, and they were owned under the control of something called the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Horses. And it's basically the encouragement of the Barb breed, which comes from the whole Iberian Peninsula there. And they're like a 3,000-year-old breed. And I got to meet the prince, who is in charge of the whole thing. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I spent 2 days working with these Barb stallions, and it was like they read the script. Like they come in, they're all big and tough, and in the end, they just would follow me around, and they're just the sweetest horses. They're beautiful. There's something about those Barbs. Like when they look you in the eye, they look into your soul. I don't know. I've not felt like that with horses before. So we worked with those horses, and then the British ambassador's wife, she has a horse too. And so one day she goes, well, can you come out and work with my horse? I'm like, sure. And so he's an Arabian stallion. He's been an Arabian racehorse, had been an Arabian racehorse. He no longer ran, so they were going to put him down, and she kind of rescued him, and I go out to work with him, and I get him out of his stall, and he doesn't know I'm alive mentally. Like he's here and he's here. I mean, you can lead him around.
Oh yeah, no, I've known plenty of horses like that.
But there's no feel, like they don't respond unless it's a physical. You can place him wherever you want. He's like a mannequin sort of thing, but those ears never come, like they don't even acknowledge you. And there was a round pen there. And so we led him across this big facility over to this round pen. And I said, what I'm going to do is turn him loose. And what I did with those Barb stallions too was, when I worked with them, I had them turn him loose in a round pen. And I just went in there, and they would be running around with their heads over the fence, like screaming and carrying on. And I had a flag with me, and I would just pick that flag up and just wave a little bit until I could get an ear to flick towards me. When they ear flicked towards me, I stopped. I wasn't trying to ask them to do anything. I wasn't putting pressure on them. And it was really about connection. It was really about getting them to change their focus onto me, but then letting them know I saw your focus change. Anyway, it was magic in the forest. It was like they read the script. So I was going to do the same thing with this horse. Anyway, I turned him loose, and he just runs around this round pen screaming and carrying on. And I let him run around for 10 minutes before he even attempted to do anything, and just stood there. Then I slowly started working with the flag, and I could get his attention, or get his ear a little bit. And then after the ear would come easily, I could kind of get the eye a little bit. And then after the eye, then he started coming over to me, and he'd come up and engage with me like, hey, how's it going? And off he'd go again, and I'd start all over again. And this went on I was probably working with him for 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. And I was starting to get somewhere. And then he came up to me at one point in time and was standing there. In retrospect, in looking back, I would say there was a lot of little things I did wrong. A lot of them, it was because, well, it's the British ambassador's wife's horse, and he hasn't killed her, so obviously it can't be too bad. I just let little things go. And she'd also been watching for the last 2 days. And so she's seen the whole process. I'll just give her the shortened version of the process. But anyway, he was standing near me, and he turned his head, and here comes 2 people leading a pony with a child on it. And he turns his head to look at this pony, And every time I got his attention before that, I was away from him. Okay. And he was standing right there. And I just kind of took that flag and just kind of tapped him on the ribs like, hey, pay attention. And he turned, leapt at me, bit me on the chest, took me down, knelt on me and mauled me. Then he gets up and runs across the round pen. And I jump up and I look and he's coming back for, his mouth's wide open. He's running straight, like running wide open straight at me. And I've got that flag and I kind of stepped towards him with the flag, trying to get him to turn off. And he was rearing up, trying to get around it like I was sword fighting a stallion.
Oh my gosh.
So I get him off. So he's mauled me. Then he gets up, runs across. Then he comes back. That first time he comes back at me, I get him off me. He goes back up the other side of the ramp and then turns around, comes straight, charging straight at me again. I get him off me a second time. I think I get him off me a third time. And the third time he goes over there and instead of turning around, coming straight back, he kind of stops and looks out through the fence. And I just jump over the fence and get out of there. And yeah, he'd bitten me right here. Like I had puncture marks and like I've still got scar tissue in there from it. So that was really pretty scary.
Yeah.
Scared the hell out of my wife because she's never seen anything like that before, you know.
Oh yeah.
And my son, he had been taking pictures, and when I got out there, I said, "Did you get pictures of that?" He goes, oh, "No, I totally forgot."
He's like, Dad, I was too worried about you.
Yeah. That night, we put the camera in the card reader of the computer. He's got a whole series of the whole thing going down, getting mauled, him rearing up, coming at me, the whole thing. Like he didn't even remember taking the pictures. And so, you know, there was a number of mistakes I made. One was, and we were going to go to the races in Casablanca that day. So I just kind of want to get this out of the way because I want to go and we're going to go to the races at Casablanca. You know.
It's Casablanca. I mean, like, come on.
So there was that. It's the ambassador's wife's horse, and she's not, you know, the world's most experienced horse person. So he must be a bit of a puppy dog. The studs the day before, I was very careful with them and it worked like magic. And then the other part was, you know, the ambassador's wife, she's seen all this and I don't want to bore her to, you know, people pleaser. Right. I don't want to bore her to death with all the same details that she watched for 8 hours yesterday and 8 hours the day before. I'll just, you know, do a bit of lip service and work with the horse a little bit. And then I've talking to a friend of mine from New Zealand, Kelly Wilson, and she works with a lot of wild horses they gather there, and she's worked with a lot of stallions, and I was telling her about it. And she said, every time I've been mauled by a wild stallion, it's been because I tried to get his attention when his attention wasn't available.
Interesting.
It was, and so, and I you know, and I think too that I was the first person who got his attention. No one else has ever paid any attention to that. And I'm probably the first person who said, I'm listening.
Yeah.
And he said, well, listen, I got some shit to tell you because, you know, so I kind of, when I actually came out of the round pen and was composing myself, the ambassador's wife said, so what do you want to do to him? I said, I don't want to do anything to him. She goes, but I said, that's not his fault. You know, that's the sum total of every bad thing that's ever happened to this horse. Do you know what pin firing a horse is?
I don't remember.
They'll take like hot needles and cauterize their front legs. It's, you know, it's supposed to help with tendon problems and stuff like that, but they basically burn like all these holes in their front leg. Well, this one had been pin fired from his withers all the way down his shoulder.
Oh, poor guy.
So there's some pretty serious trauma there. So for me, I'm like, no, I don't want to do anything to him, you know. And so we're standing around there. So that when we first got over to that round pen, I'm like, someone's left a sprinkler on. So there's mud everywhere. There's mud puddles. And like, I got to work this bloody horse in this wet round pen. So I've got more. So I've got laid flat in my back. So I've got mud all over me. Okay. So I'm standing there and this golf cart pulls up. Well, two golf carts pull up. And the first golf cart's got these two big burly guys in it. And then there's this other bearded gentleman in the second golf cart. And they pull up and then the second guy kind of waves the first guys off. And so they go. This guy gets out of the golf cart and he's wearing like sweatpants and running shoes and a t-shirt and a do-rag on his head, you know. And he's kind of, I'm talking to the ambassador's wife and he's kind of over there and she doesn't see him at first. And then she turns around and she goes, "Oh my God, that's the prince." The prince has shown up. I've just been mauled and I'm covered in mud and the prince shows up. He was on his way to work out is what he was doing. And so she brings him over and introduces me to the prince. Well, it turns out the prince has heard, they call it the Arabic grapevine, but things went so well the last 2 days that there's this rumor going around the horse circles in Morocco that there's this bloody horse whisperer guy here who has this spiritual connection with horses, because they tend to manhandle their stallions. And I had them all doing stuff at liberty and relaxed and not anxious. And
Yeah.
And so, you know, it was like some sort of a bloody great miracle. So he wanted to meet this
Miracle worker.
Vaunt, whatever he was, you know, and here I am, I've got mud all over me. But, you know, the universe gives you some funny things. So we meet him and then, like, can we take a picture? Anyway, so I got a picture of me and the prince, and he's taller than me. My arms around his waist, his arms around my shoulder. So I've got this cool picture of me and the prince. I look at it later and look at his t-shirt and it says "No pain, no gain." But yeah, that was a, and I thought I was okay with it, but that's when I was doing EMDR. And when I got back from that trip, I went to my EMDR therapist, and she says, "Is there anything you want to talk about?" I said, "Oh, I don't know. I'll tell you something that happened to me while I was in Morocco." And then, whoa, it triggered some stuff. So it was kind of still in there. And that horse was a sorrel horse with a little white kind of a strip. At clinics, even to this day, if I have a sorrel horse approach me front on that's got a little bit of white on their face, there's this little flashback that happens that I have to mentally control. Yeah. Just a little, and it goes away. But you know, I don't keep that mental picture there, because they might read it. But yeah, it's horses that approach me in that kind of situation, I have these little flashbacks to it. But I don't begrudge the horse anything. I mean, you know, I made a lot of little mistakes, mostly because I'm a people pleaser. And if you've read the cool memes that float around Facebook right now, people pleasing is just trauma, past trauma.
Yeah, lots of codependency can be wrapped in that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, but anyway, yeah. So have I had any scary experiences? Yeah, that one's pretty scary.
Yeah. I've been knocked down by a horse before. I was in Washington State, and one of my mares, I had this big Percheron appendix quarter horse cross, and the person at the facility put her into a different field without telling me anything about the horse that was in there. And so I had never been afraid of walking into a pasture with horses I didn't know before in my life. And so I just walked in there assuming that it would be fine, like every other time I'd gone into a field with horses, like being mindful. But this gray horse came up and he reared up, tucked his legs, and just punched me in the chest, basically, and knocked me like flat on my back in the mud. And thank God didn't attack me further. And I, like scrambled out from underneath the fence, like, oh my God, what just happened? And then later the people show up that own the horse, and they're just like, oh yeah, no, he does that sometimes. We usually just go in there with like a whip. And I'm just like, what? Like, who does that? Like, who puts a horse in there and doesn't tell people? And so to this day, when I go into a pasture and I don't know the horses that are there, I have to work through that, like a little bit of anxiety that just naturally comes up, because I'm just like, maybe they forgot to tell me. And they're like, I don't know these horses, and and it's always been fine, but there's still that just like, okay.
Yeah, it's best to avoid those things. And if you think about it, I trained horses for the public for 25 years, and I don't really have too many horror stories like that, because I'm very, very particular about dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. And,
Yeah.
you know, there's a meme, a Buck Brenneman meme you see floating around Facebook where it asks him about fear. And he says, oh, it's been a long time since I've been afraid, because fear comes from lack of knowledge.
Right.
And for me, like if I'm retraining a bucking, bolting, rearing, whatever, I am very step by step by step. And those steps give me the knowledge to know I'm going to be safe in the next step. What I'm doing now, the reason I know I'm going to be safe here is based on the interactions of the past. And so I'm, you know, that's me. I'm really particular about that.
Because you didn't go out gradient. You went
no,
at the proper gradient and you did all the steps to make
yeah,
sure that
I do
and
some pretty thin slicing. And I was at a
yeah,
horse expo in Australia a number of years ago, and a lady asked me, I got interviewed, and she said, so how do you, you know, most of us on this, I think it was a blog, most of us on this blog, you know, we're like ladies in kind of a middle age sort of thing. And a lot of us kind of have some fear about riding our horses. How do you go about riding these horses? You know, you get these bucking and rearing and bolting horses. How do you go about being brave riding those horses? I said, I'm not brave, I'm thorough. When you're thorough, you don't need to be brave. And so the moral of this story is, the one horror story I have was when I wasn't thorough. I was thorough with the Barb Stallions the 2 days before at the thing. I wasn't thorough then. And there was a number of different, like I said, there was 4 or 5 different reasons. And then I made that one fatal mistake of being too close and asking for his attention when he was in protection mode. You know, he wasn't just distracted, and I was close to him. You know, there's a lot of, so in hindsight, there was a lot of things, but it was, at the time I was thinking that was out of nowhere, but thinking about it after that. And that's the thing I tell people, like people say, oh, I got bucked off and, you know, I'm scared to get back on my horse. I said, well, do you know why you got bucked off? And they said, yeah. I said, what happened? And they tell me, and I said, so you made a mistake? And they said, yeah. I said, well, you don't have to be scared about it, because you know, it's like, I'm scared of driving my car because the other day I went down the freeway on the wrong side and head on someone. I'm afraid of driving my car. Well, as long as you don't do that again, you should be fine, shouldn't you? And so, you know, I made a mistake. I know what mistake I made. And so these days, I really don't care who's watching. I'm not going to change what I do because I think you think I might be taking too long. And you know, Leah's lovely, and I'm pretty sure she wasn't thinking that, but I'm thinking maybe she is thinking that. You know, it's that think
we
what
have to
they're
let go
thinking.
of ego and expectations
Yes.
so that
Yeah.
we can be fully present. I think that's
Yeah.
the key to so many things in life.
Yeah. And those 2 days working with those Barb Stallions, that was kind of the start of this connection work stuff I do now. That exercise I did there, I did it out of necessity. That was the first time I'd done it, to where I turned a horse loose and just attracted their attention with the flag, just flick an ear and then stop. And that was the first time I'd ever done that. And it was basically the first horse they bought in the round pen. They're leading it, holding it by the chin, and it's trying to half bite him and strike him. And I'm thinking, the last thing I want to do is hold on to that lead rope. The last thing I want to do is be anywhere near that horse. The further away from me, the better. And so I said, just turn him loose. And they turned him loose. And when I walked in there, he wasn't, you know, when the guy was holding him, he was kind of half biting and striking. But he wasn't interested in biting and striking anybody. He was interested in getting the hell away from them.
Yeah.
But when I worked on that connection stuff, just letting them know I see your changing thoughts and blah, 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 it was crazy, because I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea where it was going to go. But after the first couple, I'm like, this is cool. Like I've got a couple of videos on YouTube about it. One of them, towards the end of the day, you know, he's in there and he's loose, and I can walk around and he follows me around and the whole bit. And I said, has anybody got one? Well, I had a translator. He was translating into either Arabic or French, which are the 2 languages there. And it was cool. This translator is a professional translator. He's worked at the UN before. So I could talk to him in English and he could spit it out in Arabic at the same time, like 2 seconds after it went in. Like I could talk and not stop talking and he would be talking. Like it wasn't like I had to say, well, tell him I'm going to do this. And then he speaks in Arabic. And then I say, now tell. He didn't have to do that. He could, you know, like at the
That's
UN, those
amazing.
translators, someone's up there giving a speech and they're just talking and they're translating into that other language. So he translated into English and Arabic. But I said to the translator, ask any of these guys if they've got an invisible halter and lead rope. He looks at me and he says it, and they're like, what? And I go, oh, there's one on the fence. Here it is. So I go over and I pretend to pick up this invisible halter and lead rope. I said, so watch this. And this video is actually on YouTube. I said, I'm going to put my invisible halter and lead rope on. So I do that. And I said, I'm just going to walk off. And I walk off and the stud follows me. I walk in a circle. He follows me around. And then I turn and face him and stop and kind of change my energy like this a bit. So I'm going to tie him to this invisible post here. And because I'm facing him with my energy up a little bit, I step back. He doesn't follow me. It's not a beckoning energy. It's a solid energy. So I step back and he's just standing there like he's tied to a post. And then I go, now I'm going to untie him. I'm going to lead him around the other way. And I lead him. So I pretend to untie this invisible lead rope and I lead him around. And he just follows me around. And when I stop, he stops and just stands there. And I said, okay, that's good. And I pretend to take the invisible lead rope off and I go over and hang it back on the fence. So that little bit of theatrics was probably part of what the prince had heard. But what was funny was it was the same as the Mustang. I'd never done it that way before. And it was working with the first one that kind of, and it was such a huge shame. Some of them would just drop to their knees and roll and have a lay down there. And what was really crazy, across the street was a mosque. And when the call to prayer would come, so that whole, and there was one point in time, one of those barb stains has laid down and I've squatted down near him and the call to prayer comes from across the street. It was, gives me the chills thinking about it now, but yeah, it was very, very cool.
That's awesome.
Very cool experience.
Well, my friend, I feel like we could talk for hours and hours, but it's been, I think, almost 2 hours already.
Oh, really?
If you can believe it. Yeah, it's been fabulous. So I will ask you my last question. I will use self-restraint and come to a close. And my last question is, who in the world inspires you?
Who in the world inspires me? That's a great question. I think anybody who is on the path of self-discovery and self-growth inspires me, because it's, as Russell Brand would say, it's bloody hard work, It's bloody hard work and it's ugly, but it's rewarding, but it's, yeah. So, anybody who is improving themselves really inspires me. But as far as if you want to talk about horse people, I see a lot of people in the social media space that, they put this persona out there or this information out there and you think, boy, they're really good, or they appear to be really good. And then sometimes I'll see them at a horse expo and I'm like, oh, okay. And I've been following Elsa Sinclair's stuff for a few years, and then a couple of years ago at a horse expo in New Zealand, Elsa was there and I got to meet Elsa, and so I went to watch one of Elsa's demos, and about 15 minutes into Elsa's demo there's a lady sitting next to me who had been at a clinic of mine the weekend before. I didn't know her. She was just a spectator at the clinic, and I happened to sit down and I'm like, hey, how's it going? Thanks for coming to the clinic. We're sitting there watching Elsa, and about 15 minutes in, I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, you know what? I think I don't really know anything about horses. She's the real deal. Like, yeah, her stuff is all connection stuff. It's all, and a lot of the tweaks I've made have been from things Elsa does or from thinking about polyvagal theory. But yeah, I think Elsa Sinclair is the real deal. I'm a huge fan of what she's doing. I think it's just, mind-boggling stuff.
That's awesome. I love that so much. Well, Warwick, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. It has been a true pleasure. And I feel like we might have to do another one in the future just because there's so many fun things to talk about.
Oh yeah, we haven't even got started yet.
I know. I'm just like, oh my goodness gracious, we could just make it like a 3-part series.
We could.
What a pleasure. And hopefully we'll be able to get your group of all your cool podcast people together sometime.
Yes, that'd be fun.
And record that. But for the audience for now, thank you so much, everybody, for watching. And Warwick, thank you for being here, and we'll see everybody later. Bye.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
You're very welcome.